Hey, what's up? Today we're going to talk about the last of the selected Emily Dickinson poems. It's got a very happy-go-lucky title, and that title is I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died. Isn't that great? This is probably one of my favorite poems of all time. Second, maybe, to some of the stuff by W.H. Auden. Lullaby. That's British poetry, though, so we can't really talk about that here. I named my oldest son after Auden. So, yeah. Anyhow. In order to really have access to this poem, you need to understand something about the Victorian era in which we are operating in Dickinson's era. And the Victorians viewed death a lot differently than we do. We have whole institutions devoted towards building walls between us and death to try to get as much distance from it as we possibly can, even when a person is dying. Back in the Victorian era, they didn't have that. What was expected and what people wanted when a death was imminent was to be present at the death. This was a huge deal. Like, huge deal. To the point that it was considered almost kind of like a religious experience. In this way, people would be incredibly devastated and heartbroken if a loved one died and they were not there at the moment of death. We have a little bit of holdover from this, but it's not as profound as it used to be. The idea that you were supposed to be in the room at the point of death. That was supposed to be important. And I guess what they thought, you'll see a little bit of this in this poem. Death is the moment that this person sees God, right? Sees into the beyond. And it's kind of hellishly creepy for us because we live in a world where we don't want to do that. We put our loved ones in hospice. We drug them to the point that they slip away. Which is actually, in this David's humble opinion, that's kind of the way I would want it. Because if you guys have ever experienced or seen a loved one die, there's no dignity. It's bad. It's really horrifying. And so, we're in a different historical context here. And, like, the Victorians, they were really crazy about death. Like, I've been in Cracker Barrel a couple of times. Why are you going to Cracker Barrel now? Well, Cracker Barrel has a lot of what they call Americana on the wall. It's a really good subject for American literature. Americana, all sorts of stuff like old advertisements and plows and farm equipment and family portraits. And I was in Cracker Barrel one time, and there was an old photograph of a child. And the child's photograph was absolutely stunningly clear. And I'm sitting there staring at this photograph, and it's like, a really nice portrait photograph. And I tell the server, I'm like, does anything strike you as weird about this photograph? And, I feel so bad because this poor woman, I completely ruined her day. And she's like, no, what? Well, I'm like, back then cameras didn't work like they do today. In order to get a really crisp, clear picture, you had to stay really still. This is why most pictures from this era are people like... It's like there was no joy back then, right? Have you ever tried to hold a smile for like 3 hours? Yeah, good luck. That's why they did that. It wasn't because they were miserable, although probably they were. It was because, it was a real strain to hold a smile for that long. So I'm looking at this picture and I look at the woman and I'm like, that kid's probably dead. That's probably a photograph of a dead child. And she was like, well, for the Victorians, this was a very popular thing. They would pose dead children and dead relatives like they were dolls, right? And pose with them like they were alive. Now, again, this it seems really weird to us because, we put so much distance between ourselves and death. For the Victorians, it wasn't like that. This was probably the only chance you would have to have a lasting portrait, to have a memory of them in life, was to do it in death. So there was a logic to this. And it's unsettling for us, but for them it was pretty friggin' normal. Now, I'm telling you all this because there's a great deal of stuff in this poem that connects to it. Why did our conception of death, why did our relationship with it change? The Civil War. The Civil War completely leveled this relationship with death because the Victorians were horrified because so many of their sons and relatives, I mean, it wasn't just men who died in the war. There was a lot of horrible stuff that happened. So many people died in the fields. They died in the ditches and in the dirt. And in many cases, they had no idea where they were, right? There weren't any remains left. They were incinerated. They were blown up. They were just scattered all over the countryside. And this was horrifying for all of these Victorian era families. And that's when we really start seeing that we distance. We don't do this whole, I gotta be there when they die. I gotta be there at the moment of death. Because for so many people, they didn't get the chance to do that. And from a religious standpoint, a lot of these people felt that since they didn't have the remains, and since nobody knew where they were, that complicated the resurrection and the judgment. Because if there's nothing left, how does the body rise again? And we kind of revised a lot of that. But they had a really difficult time dealing with these truths. Now, I heard a fly buzz when I died. We're going to read it, we're going to analyze it. It is a really crazy poem. A lot of people think it's bleak and awful. I don't know. I have kind of a weird relationship with it. I find it so fascinating. But enough from me. Let's start reading. I'm going to pause with every stanza. I heard a fly buzz when I died. Let's talk about that first line. She's already dead. We're talking to someone who has had the experience of dying. And she's come back. She says, hey, let me tell you what dying's like. It's kind of like because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. But in this poem, we don't have a friendly personification of death wearing a top hat and a monocle and saying, hello, gentle lady. Do you want to ride with me with our horses' heads turned towards eternity? I'm sorry, that was awesome. Anyhow, let's keep going. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. Everything is silent now. Everything is still. There's calm. Between the heaves of storm. You ever heard the expression calm before the storm? That's kind of what she's hinting at here. We think of death as like the advent of an ultimate peace. But in this case, it's almost like a lull, right? The eyes around had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset, when the king be witnessed in the room. They're done crying. The eyes around had wrung them dry. The breaths were gathering firm. Everybody's like, oh, she's gonna die. It's so weird. God, I love Emily Dickinson. For that last onset, when the king, there's a really good reason why king is capitalized there. It be witnessed in the room. She's dying. She's going to witness God or Jesus or Cthulhu. I don't know. Obviously, for Dickinson, this is the witnessing of Yahweh or Jesus from the Christian tradition. So that's what they're all waiting for, right? She's going to see. It's going to be like this. Oh, there he is. Bleh. Right? Okay. But let's keep going. I willed my keepsakes, signed away, what portion of me be assignable. Let's stop here. All the things she has willed away. A will, you basically give away the stuff that you have because you're not going to be playing with it no more, right? But I love the way she says, I signed away what portion of me be assignable. In this case, it's like she's doling out whole sections or chunks of herself. Wow, right? Wow. And then it was, there interposed a fly. She's expecting to see God, but instead she sees a fly. Now, there's a lot to be said about this, that instead of the majesty of God, there's a fly. What does the fly represent for us? Well, for me, a fly is decay. It is disease. It is filth. But at the same time, we don't necessarily have to read that much into the symbolism. We can just say it's a fly. It's a bug. It's this inconsequential thing. It doesn't matter at all, right? It might as well be, I saw a cockroach when I died. Or I saw a moth. It doesn't necessarily have to have all this significance. Let's keep going. We'll return back to this image. This stanza is probably my favorite stanza in the history of English poetry. With blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz. Answer me this. How in the world can a buzz be blue? A buzz is a sound. How does a sound have color? Unless you've been hitting the wacky tobacco, you probably have never seen the color of sound. It's an incredible description because it defies logic and it can't really be felt or experienced. This blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me. And then the windows failed. And then I could not see to see. What a poem, man. I mean, at the end, a lot of people read this and they want answers, right? It's like, what happened? What does the fly mean? Where'd the light go? And Dickinson's not giving it to you. She is being very, very stern that this is the end and everything's falling apart. Everything's coming unraveled. And that's all there is, right? Now, the fly is between the light and me. This is such a weird thing, and I don't think that Dickinson meant to do this, but one of the names for Satan and Lucifer is Beelzebub, and that's the Lord of the Flies. And I always think about that when I read this poem, because there does seem to be something standing between the light and you, and I don't think she meant for this to have like a demonic aspect to it. I think it's more just supposed to be something that's there that's of no consequence whatsoever. You're expecting to see Jesus and, oh, look, it's a bug, right? And the final description, and the windows failed. I like that because it's not the light that's failing. The light's still there. It's the windows. Almost like, you're lying in bed, you're dying, right? You're about to die. It's not that the light is ceasing, it's that the windows aren't there anymore. Now, also, you have to think about this. Is she looking at a physical window? I kind of tend to think there is because it's like the fly is between the light and her. But the windows, in this sense, could be her eyes. It could be that her eyes themselves are failing. I prefer, you'll notice that I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong way to read this. I prefer to think of it as she's in the bed, she's dying, she sees the light that's coming from outside, right? And the windows themselves fail. It's like she can't even see the physical things that are there. It's just gone. And then I could not see to see. Why do you see to see? You're trying to see something to see it? It's a bizarre and unorthodox use of language. And I think that this is probably a really accurate description of what it's like to actually die as things start to lose meaning and stuff starts to, like I said earlier, unravel. And her experience is that death is not the grand procession where God comes to meet you, but it is a natural thing, and it happens and it unfolds, and every part of you fails, right? What a weird freaking thing. I think Dickinson is looking ahead to the fact that the Victorian conception of death is itself doomed, that we can't romanticize it. We can't have that relationship with it. It is a naturalistic thing. And again, for her to be such an avid religious thinker, this is a very strange poem on that regard. I've really enjoyed doing these Dickinson poems. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. You probably didn't, but that's okay. I forgive you.